The land before European settlement. Back before the European settlement, the population of the United States was very low. The landscape among the undiscovered American land had a tremendous amount of diversity between the countless plants, animals, and indigenous people that lived that lived there. There was a tremendous difference between the landscape 500 years ago compared to the landscape now. The only people that lived in the United States at the time were the indigenous people that were native to the land. Um, they had been there for thousands of years and they did not leave a major impact on the plant population, the tree population, or on the environment. The reason that the landscape in the United States was so rich with forests before the European settlement was because the indigenous people that originally occupied the land, they were not advanced with technology. They respected the land and what it had to offer to them. And they also used a tree for all of its resources, which required them to use less trees. The trees were just as important to the indigenous people as the Europeans who settled in the United States, but they were there. But they used the trees in totally different ways. The Europeans were there to cut down the trees, and the indigenous people, they were there living in the same forests that were being cut down, driving them out of their villages and forcing them to make new homes in different parts of the country. Indigenous people were advanced in their own type of way. They had little to no knowledge about different types of resources and technology that other parts of the world had discovered. For example, they used a strategy called tree feeling. There are many types of tree feeling, but a commonly used tactic was when they would cut a small hole into the trunk of the tree, and then they would set a fire in that small hole. Um, to keep the fire from spreading, they would put wet clay around the trunk. This process could take hours to cut down a tree, and even days to cut down a pretty large sized tree. And it would make it more hard for them to predict where the tree was going to fall. When the tree did fall, they needed 200 men and a full day just to get the tree to the river, where they had a whole new process of trying to get the tree where they wanted it to float along the river. When the Europeans came to the United States, they were a lot more advanced, and that is why they were able to make such destruction to the tree population. If the indigenous people, if they were advanced, then they could cut down trees at a higher rate. They still wouldn't do so because they respected the land and the environment. Some tribes would even worship the nature and the animals. Indigenous people lived off land for thousands of years before the Europeans settled in the United States. During that time, they did not make a fraction of the impact that the Europeans did. And the Europeans were not there for nearly as long. Tribes were thin and scattered all across the land, totaling around 80 million, indigenous people. When cutting down a tree, the indigenous people were very aware that it was hurting the environment. Of course, they cut down trees, though. They had to do it to survive, but they did not cut down nearly the same amount as the Europeans did. The indigenous people did take out trees in large amounts on occasion, but it was for good reasons, to clear out land to plant crops or to build villages. When they did build their homes, they were there to stay. Like they made sure that they were um, in a good location that had a lot of materials around them. Like they had access to water, hunting grounds, and land where they could grow crops. So when the indigenous people settled, they had all the materials around them, so they didn't have to go somewhere else after a few years whenever they they ran out of resources. When they cut down trees, they used the tree for all of its resources. They built a lot of tools and weapons and their shelter out of the trees and the tree branches. From building their shelter to making just simple arrows, the indigenous people were very good about using all of the tree, similar to how they used all of the buffalo when they hunted and killed it. It was very hard for them to cut down large trees, so they tried to cut down smaller ones, which was more resourceful because um, a thinner tree actually is easier to build like a teepee or a shelter with, and in a small tree, the branches off of them are smaller, which is more beneficial to them because that's about the same size as their tools needed to be. They were very clever and they helped protect the trees. For example, they would burn all the bushes and brush from underneath the trees so that way when there was a slimmer chance for a forest fire, so that way they would not lose all their trees. Indigenous people, they had a different mindset for the trees. And it's too bad that when the Europeans settled in the United States, that everyone lost the value for trees.